There was shock. At 6 o'clock, as that news broke, there was an audible gasp in the BBC's newsroom. According to some people that we spoke to, some people were even reduced to tears. You've got to remember, this is somebody that they have worked with for, in some cases, decades. Huw Edwards has been here for 39 years at the BBC, fronting the BBC News at 10 for the past 20 years. And even though, as we'd heard in that BBC Radio 4 interview with the BBC Director General, that almost everybody in the building knew, to have that name confirmed still came as a shock to many here.
Now, the story of the BBC presenter accused of buying explicit pictures of a young person has been a tricky one to handle. And lots of you have been getting in touch with questions about the media coverage. Now, many of us at Times Radio know and have worked with Huw Edwards. We knew his identity before he was named. The people who came up with the story at The Sun work downstairs from us here at News UK. Also trying to work their way through the complexities of the story are the people at the BBC who produce news programmes there, and they include Luke Jones, who's with me today on Times Radio, but who also works at the BBC. And Luke was part of the BBC team that revealed new allegations last night that Huw Edwards sent inappropriate messages to people working for the BBC itself. Now, we'll explore those tangles as we go on this morning. But first, let's visit Broadcasting House, home of the BBC's management and its news department. And we will speak to Oliver Whitfield Miocic, who is there for Times Radio. Good morning to you, Oliver.
Good morning, Asma.
Tell us a bit about, well, first of all, there are these new allegations, and it now, I think it's a total of seven people who have now accused Huw Edwards of some kind of inappropriate contact. There's no illegality at this point. What happens now in the BBC's internal processes?
So the BBC will now carry out its investigation. Remember, the Metropolitan Police had asked the BBC to pause that investigation so that it could carry out its own inquiries, which it did pretty rapidly. In the space of 24 hours, it was able to find no criminality. So it has now told the BBC that its internal investigation can continue. And that includes at least 7 people who have spoken out against the BBC star presenter Huw Edwards. The BBC, though, is facing a tough time with this because whilst it carries out its investigation, which will look at not only the allegations but the way that the BBC handled the way the allegations were put to them, it also has to balance that with the duty of care that it does have to Huw Edwards and his mental health.
Now, you spoke to BBC staff members yesterday. What has been the reaction to Huw Edwards' wife's statement?
There was shock. At 6 o'clock, as that news broke, there was an audible gasp in the BBC's newsroom. According to some people that we spoke to, some people were even reduced to tears. You've got to remember, this is somebody that they have worked with for, in some cases, decades. Huw Edwards has been here for 39 years at the BBC, fronting the BBC News at 10 for the past 20 years. And even though, as we'd heard in that BBC Radio 4 interview with the BBC Director General, that almost everybody in the building knew, to have that name confirmed still came as a shock to many here.
Now, we've heard about these new allegations about his conduct in the BBC workplace. There's been no response from Huw Edwards or his representatives to those latest allegations, I think I'm right in saying. But the BBC put out an email, I think it was yesterday, trying to reassure people who might have complaints about this kind of thing that they could get in touch.
Yes, that's right. So back in relation to Luke's investigation, which was carried out in conjunction with Victoria, Derbyshire, the BBC did put out a statement via its press office saying that it does have processes in place and anybody else who has concerns should feel free to come forward. One of the main complaints that we'd heard in that investigation was that some staff members felt that they could not speak out because of the position which Huw Edwards occupied. Now, in a separate statement that was issued by Tim Davies to all staff, he acknowledged how tough a period this was for everybody at the BBC, but that its main priority at the moment was making sure that the duty of care towards Huw Edwards was being fulfilled. So It's a really tough time here at the BBC. They've got to try and find that perfect balance between making sure that they're holding their own staff to account whilst taking care of their own staff.